When I was 3 years old, I was in a really bad car accident. I didn't know it at the time, but that singular event would come to define everything about my life moving forward. What I remember about the accident is mostly a collage of backdated comments I was able to reel out of my father in the following years since. He was driving me and my mom in his old Chevy Tahoe through the twisting back roads of southern Illinois, weaving his way through the gnarled branches of oak trees, which interlocked into a braided ceiling overhead. A fog had rolled in, giving the impression that we were driving through a cloudy tube. Everything was simultaneously bright and opaque. I didn't mind though, as I was in the back seat working on a coloring book. My mom was in the front talking with my dad or turning around to entertain my completed pictures. Although I was of the age where my memory was just beginning to mature, I still recall two things very clearly from the accident. First was the sensation of braking. I remember feeling the way a plate must feel to be dropped, weightless at first, and suddenly meeting a much larger, more solid object. The air popped like a firecracker, and the entirety of my body shattered into hundreds of fractals. And then I remember a hand. It was my dad's hands, pulling me from the wreck. I ended up hospitalized for weeks after the crash, and well, my mom was less lucky. The impact had killed her instantly. Anyway, as I've alluded to, I was young, and at the time I didn't fully understand the implications of what had happened. I knew something was missing, but it was like a word on the tip of my tongue, or the forgotten vanilla in a cherished cake recipe, coloring my experience, but not the whole of it. Not like my dad. For him, it was a whole fucking cake. He had somehow made it out with only a few scratches. I'm sure he had a really bad case of survival skill, and frankly, looking back, I wouldn't have blamed him if he slumped into despair and spent his days drinking away his sorrow. But he wasn't that type of man. He got help. It took him years before he was able to recall anything that happened that morning, and most of it is still repressed, but he shared with me what he could, or at least that's what I had thought. My dad was a middle school teacher since before I was born, and kept his job until very recently. As a result, we didn't have much by way of resources. I grew up on Disney Channel and TV dinners for the most part, but I didn't mind. When I became of school age, his job actually made caring for me pretty convenient. Since our elementary school and middle school were connected, he was able to drive me there and back each day. It was around 3rd or 4th grade that I realized I was different. I didn't understand the other children or even the adults most of the time. That they would say things that immediately changed their mind, or they would talk about something and in the next breath forget its existence entirely. I remember one day at lunch I had just gotten my tray of hot food and sat down with some friends. One of the kids, Alex, was talking about a stuffed bird he had won for getting first place in Mr. Curtis's pop-up math competition. We were all admiring its blue wings and white belly and sharp black beak and beady eyes. I left mid-conversation to get chocolate milk, and when I came back I asked to see the bird again, and Alex said, "What bird?" I was perplexed. "The bluebird, the blue jay you were just showing us." I remember all of the other kids looking at me like I was crazy. I figured they were all playing a trick on me, so I got up and went over to Alex's seat and crouched down looking under the table. Then I sprung up and tried to open his lunchbox. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled. I felt so confused and embarrassed that I ran to the bathroom to cry. And then there was another time a group of kids were laughing about a joke one of the girls, Taylor, had made, and about our hometown teacher's face looking like a seal. I knew it was mean, but at the time I just wanted to fit in, so I played along. But I made a comment about a resemblance to the semi-aquatic animal, and they all looked at me confused. What are you talking about? We never said that. These misattributions kept happening, and it led me to being ostracized from most of the little childish cliques that popped up. I developed a quasi-standoffish temperament, which I used as a shield against a chaotic world that I didn't understand. My dad eventually had me tested for ASD, autism spectrum disorder, but I passed the test. He asked if I wanted to move to a different town with different schoolmates, thinking that perhaps I was getting bullied, but I told him it was fine. Somewhere deep down I felt like no matter where I went, this problem would follow me. You may think that I was simply coping with the absence of my mom, and while I'm sure that her absence has left certain holes in my life, kindly know that wasn't what was happening. You see, at first I didn't notice the instances of what I'll call blinking. I simply thought that I was misremembering things, objects, words, events. They were all little things anyway. A bird, a joke, my pencil box. It wasn't until 6th grade that I realized the magnitude of the phenomenon. I was in my dad's 6th grade social studies class, and we had just been assigned our Ancient Civilizations project, which involved creating a diorama of our chosen civilization and presenting its features to the class. My friend at the time, Claire, had taken my first choice of ancient Rome, which we had a heated argument about at lunch, so I was left with ancient Egypt. At the time, all I pictured for Egypt was a plate of sand. However, my dad and I went through some illustrated history books and pictures on the internet, and he really built up the project for me. Over the course of a couple months, he helped me shape 3 pyramids out of a couple of small wooden planks we had laying around, and a bunch of tan clay. We placed them in the center of a giant square shoebox lid which served as a container for the diorama. Then he brought some small wooden mannequin puppets, and we dressed them in cloth clothes, mostly kilts and tunics, and colored their eyes, mouths, and hair. We added a few obelisks and some small box huts which were collected into a little village around the Nile. Finally, we added a light glaze of glue where we felt would be necessary, and then covered the whole project with golden glitter. As we worked on each part of the diorama, my dad helped me understand what we were adding and why it was important to ancient Egypt. I loved the way he talked about history. He spun everything into a miraculous story. To this day, I don't think I've ever had a teacher who came close to his level of charisma and creativity. As a result, I became really proud of my diorama. I memorized all the little details and rehearsed my speech in front of the mirror for hours leading up to the last couple of weeks of class. And then 2 days before I was supposed to give my presentation, everything just fell apart. First, I need to apologize for deceiving you about an aspect of my story. I thought it might help you to understand what I was going through at the time, and what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane. I get that, but please hear me out. The truth is that I was never assigned to present on ancient Egypt. Everything else about Claire taking my first pick and Dad helping me with the whole project and my excitement leading up to the presentation was all true, but it wasn't a project on ancient Egypt. It was a project on ancient Citivan, which is a civilization located on the 8th continent called Catalan, the same name as the spoken language but unrelated, which was due west of Australia in the Indian Ocean. I know this sounds incredible, and if you want to believe it's all in my head, I get that, but I remember all sorts of facts about it. The Maligacy, the people who populated Madagascar were the first people to discover Catalan and settle it. However, about 500 years later, Indian ships would arrive and create the civilization known as Citivan, a Piccan language formed between the indigenous population and the new arriving Indians called Hesa. Catalan had a warm climate with plenty of natural resources, but Sidivan had a dense enough population to require agriculture production. They grew rice, grain, sugarcane, vegetables, and even tobacco. I remembered all of these facts and more. My diorama reflected the main features of the Sidivan civilization, and then 2 days before my presentation I woke up and my diorama was entirely different. The grassy hills were traded out for sandy dunes. The Hindu statues and stone palaces became clay pyramids and spear-like pillars, and everything was covered in the ickiest yellow glitter I'd ever seen. Tears stung at my eyes as I trampled over to my dad's room and banged on his door. Dad, what did you do?" I yelled. "Honey," he responded, rushing over to the base of the stairs. "What's wrong?" The diorama, it's ruined." "It's what?" he asked and ran up the stairs, leading me to my room. He looked over it for a few seconds, checking to see if everything was intact, and said, I don't see it, honey. Where is it ruined?" I was completely dumbstruck. What did he mean he didn't see it? "All of it," I shouted. "The whole thing is wrong. Where's the grass and the stone buildings and the lady with the 4 arms and the elephants? Where's my project?" My dad looked at me in silence. "What civilization do you think you were working on?" "Ancient Sidivan, of course. We've been working on this for months now. Dad, please tell me you remember." He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulder. "Honey, your project was on ancient Egypt. But there is no ancient Sidivan." You're lying," I protested. Books! You have books on your bookshelf." He took me into his study and showed me all of his books, and none of them were on ancient Sidivan. He even turned on his computer and typed in the name of the civilization, but all that came up was a near-matched Sidon. I remember feeling the sudden urge to puke. My entire body felt like it was pumping battery acid instead of blood. I don't," I started. But suddenly my head felt very light, and I fainted. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had lost consciousness for over half an hour, enough time for my dad to call 911 and have the ambulance transport me to the nearest ER. They ran all sorts of tests on me, but they all came back fine. After a couple hours of IV fluids and monitoring, they released me with my dad. I ended up skipping the rest of school that week. My dad didn't make me present my diorama. In fact, he never brought up the subject again, and part of me was glad. I just wanted to forget the whole thing ever happened, but another part of me couldn't move past what was clearly the most absurd thing to ever happen to me. About a week after the incident, I tried to broach the subject. But when I asked my dad about it, he didn't seem to remember our conversation at all. He said I'd fallen ill, and that's why I needed to go to the ER and miss class, and I felt like I was going crazy. If I was older, I would probably voluntarily check myself into a psychiatric ward, but I was young and helpless and alone, and I decided that if I just ignored the changes well enough, I could still get along. This proved difficult, though, as the blinking would only exacerbate in the coming months. Up until the time of the project, I hadn't been able to directly observe the phenomenon. It was always in retrospect that things disappeared, and it was during the summer after 6th grade that this had changed. I still remember the first time it happened. I had just gotten out of the shower and was drying my hair in front of the mirror. After it was dried, I threw on my clothes, then went to tie my hair up in a ponytail. But When I went to set the elastic tie, I felt its weight dissipate in my hand. I gasped and held out my hand, and the circular black band was gone. Fast forward to 7th grade, and the blinking had spiraled out of control. Reflecting back on it, most people would have probably assumed I was drinking shroom-infused water, as the delusions were somewhat consistent with psychedelic phenomena, except these distortions were real. At least they felt that way to me. I'd wake up and grab the box of Special K but end up eating Cheerios. The McDonald's logo would look yellow and red one day but purple and black the next. I'd be watching a show and then a different show and then a different one. It was as if the entire universe was a Christmas tree with millions of lights, and the lights kept shifting hues randomly, faster and faster, and I was the only one who could see their changing colors. I remember one night my dad made spaghetti for dinner, and we went out onto the porch to eat it, and while we were sitting, I saw a neighbor's house, a 2-story townhome, blink and become a single-story bungalow. I gasped, and my dad asked me what was wrong, and when I tried to explain it to him, he just gave me a strange look. For him, no matter what changed, the world was always that way, and well, for me, it didn't have a way. The situation peaked when Claire, that friend I mentioned before, disappeared. I texted her. My dad had bought me a BlackBerry at the beginning of summer break, but didn't get a response. When I asked her other friends if they knew where she had gone, I got the usual, "What are you talking about?" look. I knew right away what had happened, and even though I didn't want to believe it, I went to the teacher and asked if there was a Claire in our class, and she said no. I broke down in front of everyone. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran into the school. The lady at the front desk tried to stop me, but I just barreled past her. I kept running until I got to a big park across the street and bawled my eyes out until the police arrived and escorted me home. When they tried asking me what was wrong, I didn't say anything. There was literally nothing I could say that they would understand. And that night I prayed to God for the first time. My dad wasn't a religious man, and he went to Catholic church with my mom when she was alive, but after she died, he never went back. Still, I knew how to pray, even if I never did it. I copied some of the people I saw praying in movies and interlocked my fingers and knelt down on my bed, stuffing my head into a pillow. "Dear God," I said, "please, please, please help me." I told him about my struggles and asked him to take them away, to make them stop. And I spent an hour saying the same things over and over again. And when I was finished, my little body was so tired, I fell right to sleep. I knew something was different the second I opened my eyelids. I didn't only feel relieved, but I felt embraced. I felt like someone was watching over me. I felt like I wasn't alone. I moved through my day with cautious apprehension. I didn't want to get my hopes up only to be let down, but to my surprise, the blinking had stopped. At least I couldn't remember any of the inconsistencies, and to me, that was a win. I began to pray regularly, and the more I did, the more I could feel the sense that someone was looking out for me. It was like I was getting a big hug from some cosmic force that loved me and wanted me to be happy. I made it a habit to pray regularly. I asked my dad if he could take me to a church, and he agreed to take me to St. Mark's, the same church that he and my mom used to attend. Over time, I realized that the actual church services weren't as important to me as the praying. For whatever reason, there was something about praying that was like a glue for my brain, holding the entire universe together. As I got older, I considered that maybe it wasn't that the changes were no longer happening, but I simply didn't see them anymore. In other words, maybe I was just becoming like everyone else, and either way, I didn't mind. In my teenage years, I got into mindfulness meditation. I thought that I'd want to go into religious studies and become a theologian. So I started to learn about Eastern traditions and additions to Christianity. I joined a bunch of different school clubs to meet kids of different faiths: Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I tried to find a common thread which linked them all and would explain what happened to me as a child. The metaphors of heaven and hell, good and evil, the Taoist yin and yang duality. Every religion seemed to speak about a way of being that would lead to a better place. And in some cases that a better place was a physical future existence, and in others it was merely being in contact with the perfection of nature or the present, and metaphorically the teachings could explain what I had gone through in a kind of loose way, but there were no explicit statements about my condition.